mic for sure. And then Jose, remind me to give this to you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here. For the past 15 months that I've been a county supervisor, I've had many conversations with individuals in Rio Linda about becoming a city. I've seen many posts that on your social media pages that have talked about incorporating and what it means to incorporate and some of the benefits of incorporating. And so after it was a couple of months ago that I thought, I think it's time that we bring the expert to have a conversation with you all about what does incorporation mean? How do you get to it? What are the necessary steps that have to be taken to incorporate? What are the benefits of a corporation and what are the benefits of being a part of the county? And more important, how do you sustain yourselves long-term as a city? So with me tonight is Jose Henriquez from LAFCO, and Jose will tell you a little bit about who he is and what LAFCO does for the county. But I want to thank you all for being here tonight. We are going to do about a 15-20 minute presentation and then spend about half an hour. You guys can ask any questions you have about incorporating or any questions you have about his presentation. So I'm going to hand it over to Jose. Here.
Rosario for being here. Rosario, the microphone?
No, yep.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Everybody, nobody's been here.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Hi, my name is Jose Enriquez. I am the Executive Officer for the Sacramento County Local Agency Formation Commission. So you might be wondering what is LAFCO and why is a comedy club talking to us about a city? What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a presentation on the incorporation process. And I will throw a lot of information at you. It's okay, I'm hoping to get through it, and then we can answer it for Q&A. At least one of you called my office and asked to just basically you're ready to write a check and get the party going. But this is not even the beginning of the process. This is information that so that you can have. So as you continue your discussions about a potential incorporation, you'll know some of the things that will need to be answered, what needs to be brought to LAFCO in order to have a successful petition. So I'm going to ask if you can hold your questions until the end because I am going to cover a lot of information. First, what is LAFCO? Second, what the process entails. Third, what are the materials that we would need to initiate the incorporation process? And then some of the things that you need to think about if you want to continue to have this dialogue going. So let's begin. So LAFCO was created in 1963 as a response basically to the baby boom of post-World War II era where California experienced tremendous growth. And in that tremendous growth, one of the things that Governor Pat Brown started noticing is that essentially a lot of disadvantaged communities were being overlooked. A lot of the poor and rural areas were not being provided the services that they required. And he thought we need to have something essentially to bring some kind of method to the madness. His original proposal was to have one statewide agency to regulate the boundaries, and then that got negotiated to having a LAFCO in every county so that you have one basic law that all of us have to implement, but we take the local conditions into consideration. Because what happens in Sacramento is not the same thing that would happen in Amador, it's not the same thing that would happen in LA. So we have four basic missions. We have the preservation of agricultural and open space resources. We have the prevention of urban sprawl. We have the orderly formation of governments and the ensuring the efficient extension and provision of public services. So if some of those seem contradictory, they are, because some cases having an efficient government means that you developed agricultural or open space land. Or to ensure public services, it means that maybe you're going to have to allow for a little bit of sprawl. So there are different things that the commission has to take into account, and essentially, at some point, some information will outweigh the other that will allow a commission to make a decision this versus that. So LAFCO's authority is encompassed by what's called the Cortesi-Knox-Hertzberg. We just call it CKH or LAFCO law. It's Government Code 56,000, and if you are suffering from sleep deprivation and you want to get you something to get through it, Government Code 56,000 is for you. But essentially, LAFCOs also have to comply with other statutes like the Brown Act, the California Environmental Quality Act, the Levine Act, FPPC regulations, and then depending on the type of government that you're forming, each type of government that you hear out there, you know of the Rio Linda Elverta Park District, you know of Rio Linda Elverta Water, they all have their own sections of the code that's pertinent to them. So we have to make sure that whatever we do it consistent with what CKH and what is with their principal act for that agency. So who sits on LAFCO? I'm not LAFCO. I am the head administrator. I run the day-to-day operations for LAFCO. LAFCO is composed of my commission. And the commission is, as I mentioned earlier, that you have to take local conditions into account. These are the local representatives who sit on LAFCO. And the way that it's broken up is that you have essentially 2 members of the Board of Supervisors, currently Supervisors Desmond and Hume. You have 2 members of the cities in Sacramento County, which are 7 in total, and that would be Council Members Kaplan and Council Member Pratton from Galt. You have 2 members of the Independent Special Districts in Sacramento County. Does anybody know how many we have here? We have 64 independent special districts. So they elect 2 representatives to sit on LAFCO and make decisions, and that would be Gay Jones. She's from Sac Metro Fire, and recently elected Robert Wickert from Sac Suburban Water District. And then those 6 elect 1 person to represent the public at large, and that would be Chris Little. Each of those positions have an alternate, so in case somebody is either disqualified, they have to recuse themselves, or they fell ill and they can't serve, they have an alternate. So Supervisor Rodriguez is the alternate for the county. You may wonder how LAFCO is funded. Essentially, LAFCO is funded primarily by the local agencies. So we have 4 different categories of revenues. One is applicant fees. The other one are reserves or carryover from one year to the next. The other one is basically whatever we generate in interest revenue while our money sits in the bank. But the largest chunk really is the contributions from the local agencies. So the Sacramento County pays 1/3. The 7 cities split the 2/3, and then the independent special districts split the last 1/3. The LAFCO budget assumes that there's going to be some amount of revenue that comes in from applications, meaning that essentially applicants, when they apply to LAFCO, will pay their own way. I have to essentially break out the crystal ball and try to figure out how many applications I'm going to get a year and how much revenue I'm going to get out of it. But the assumption is there. So the agency contributions is basically to keep the lights on and keep staff available as a resource. And then as applicants come in asking for boundary changes, they pay for the application that benefits them. In terms of staff, it's basically me, and I have 2 analysts. And then we contract for services for other functions, like we have, essentially we contract with the clerk of the Board of Supervisors to run our public meetings. We bill on a time and material basis, and then if I don't have any applications, there's a hole in my budget. Because like I said, the assumption is we're going to get a certain level of activity. It makes it very difficult during recessionary times because development and interest among agencies to alter their boundaries means that we wouldn't have as much activity as possible. Interestingly enough, just from a local government nerd aspect, the biggest increase that we have is usually at the tail end of a recession. So when we see activity pick up, even if the economy is still under a recession, that's kind of how we know that, that the people are feeling that the economy is going to pick up. I always get the question, why do we charge applicants? And that's because essentially applicants are the ones who benefit from the LAFCO action. Not having them pay for their own application means that everybody else is subsidizing their activity. So even though it's risky for me to have a certain assumption of applications on a budgetary year, from an equity standpoint, it just seems to balance it out. So LAFCO powers, essentially, any changes in boundaries. So whenever you hear about the city annexing a portion of land or two districts consolidating, both actions of which LAFCO just recently processed, that all involves LAFCO. So it's annexations, dissolutions, consolidations, reorganizations. We basically, also conduct studies to determine how agencies are currently providing services. So for example, just in our last meeting, we were discussing Florin County Water District, which was brought to our attention from a study that the grand jury had done on the district and said you need to take a closer look at them. So we did. So these studies essentially provide us with the context about how well an agency is performing. And if an agency looks like it's not performing particularly well, the commission can take a position of essentially that needs to be dissolved. And in fact, that occurred with Del Paso Manor Water District, which is in the Arden Arcade area. We found that the district really had some significant problems and the district needed to be dissolved. And so ultimately it was annexed into Sac Suburban Water District. So Del Paso Manor no longer exists. So we do take the provision of services seriously, and it's something that the commission definitely takes a very close look at when they're reviewing agencies and how well they're providing services. So primary LAFCO powers are that the commission does have the discretionary authority to deny, approve, or conditionally approve a project. LAFCOs are essentially a state agency with local representation, which means that the only way that you can overturn a LAFCO decision if you're not happy with it is to sue us. You can't appeal to the Board of Supervisors, you can't appeal to any other body. The commission is an entity unto itself, and so to get what's called relief from a LAFCO decision, you have to essentially sue LAFCO. We also have to comply with CEQA. You're wondering why is it that all you're doing is you're moving an imaginary line on a map. Why would it be subject to CEQA? Because the courts told us we were subject to CEQA. That's essentially what the reason is. It was a court case from the 1970s, and so now we have to take CEQA into account. About land use. There are very few prohibitions under LAFCO law about what the commission can and cannot do. One of them that is distinctly spelled out is that we have no land use authority. You can come in to annex into a city, and we will take a look at what you're proposing to put into that annexation, whether you're putting in 30 homes or 300 homes, and we will look at whether or not there's sufficient capacity to provide services to what you're planning on doing on that land use. But we can't say, well, we don't like that you're going to build 300 homes, you're going to build 200. That authority, that power is exclusively reserved for the county and for the cities. And I was asked earlier, what's the biggest reason why you would want to become a city? And that's what it is that basically cities have the ability to designate what you can and cannot be built within the city limits. It's, and in LAFCO terms, we call it home rule. LAFCOs can approve essentially policies that will further refine what the law is. This is again part of our ability to take state law and modify it, not modify, but essentially further define what it means to take things into local conditions. So who can bring actions to our LAFCO? And that's essentially 3 different parties. One party would be the landowners. Another party are registered voters. And the third parties are agencies, public agencies. School districts, for example, are not subject to LAFCO jurisdiction, but school districts can actually petition to LAFCO to do some kind of boundary change, believe it or not. So any public agency can take that action, whether or not they're subject to LAFCO jurisdiction or not. And in fact, there's a section of LAFCO law that says when a district is not a district, which sounds paradoxical, but basically what that section defines is what agencies are under LAFCO jurisdiction and which ones are not. So for example, the county of Sacramento is not subject to LAFCO. However, the county can create something that's called a dependent special district, and that dependent special district, also known as a county service area, that is subject to LAFCO jurisdiction. All right, so perceptions and misperceptions. And the thing is that the legislature has created LAFCOs to be a deliberative body and to ensure, and I'll cover it in a different slide, but essentially to ensure that whatever you're planning on doing can actually be sustained in the long term. And the long term is defined 50 to 100 years. So it's not in the best interest of LAFCO to rush things or to utilize outdated information. We get questions from developers who want the annexation because they want to start building, in the fall, and we have to tell them no. It's, we recognize that, we'll do our best, but the reality is that what the government code tells LAFCOs to do is to ensure that you take a very careful approach about boundary changes, because obviously things will happen, and you try to plan it as best as you can. Because one of the things that I try to describe people is that when you're changing the boundary line, you're not just affecting those who you're bringing in to an agency, you're also affecting the existing customers. And we have to make sure that when an agency extends services to a brand new area, or you're forming a brand new district, you have the capacity, or you have demonstrated the capacity and the capability of extending services, but you're also doing it without harming your existing customers. So, so it is intended to be very slow. And in some cases, you always have to make sure that you wait for certain triggers to get the freshest of information, and that's very important in the incorporation process. So the direction really has been, is that essentially you have to make sure that whatever you're creating, whatever agency you're amending, it has to be sustainable in the long term. And it doesn't benefit anyone to create a brand new agency that's going to go insolvent in 10, 15 years. So that's why you have to gather a lot of data, and sometimes it's a call. But you have to make sure that essentially what you're creating is sustainable in the long term. And for cities, definitely it has to be sustainable in the long term for reasons that I'll bring up in a sec. So under the state constitution, it differentiates between counties and cities. It gives cities certain authority and certain powers that counties don't have. And in fact, from a financing standpoint, cities are more nimble than counties. One of the biggest differences between the cities and the counties, even though you have a significant overlap, is that counties actually have certain programs under the state that they are mandated to provide, and they have to provide county-wide. So for example, the court system. The county maintains the court system, and it's funded county-wide, but it's not funded by the cities. So that's an expense that the county has that the cities don't have. The social safety net programs are also administered by the county, and they're supposed to be administered county-wide regardless of cities, but those are not funded by the cities. The county has to use its own revenues to fund them. So because of that, when you incorporate a city, again, there are certain revenues that now become what's called situs. They essentially, they're generated in that area and they're retained in that area. And one of the biggest ones are property taxes. Your property taxes are capped at 1% by Prop 13. However, that property tax dollar that's collected on your property is distributed to various agencies. So roughly speaking, you would have, let's say, 30% goes to the county, 40% goes to the schools, then 10% might go to like a road maintenance. It does, believe it or not. But there's different categories. I would invite you, actually, next time you look at your property tax dollar, it's supposed to list. We can look outside and see all the holes. Oh, I drove here. I know what you're talking about. But I'm just using it as an example that basically that property tax dollar gets allocated to different entities, some of which might be a water district, some of it might be a park and rec district. In your property tax bill, it's actually supposed to list what that property tax dollar funds. So you may want to take a look at that. That's one of the fun things you get to learn in this job. But essentially, when a city incorporates, it has the legal authority to retain all the property tax dollars that used to go to the county to retain it. But again, that property tax portion that currently goes to the county also funds county-wide programs. So as a result of a court case that made it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court about 20 years ago, and it came out of Sacramento County, was this concept called revenue neutrality, which is roughly like essentially not quite alimony, but basically they're divorce proceeding funds that occur as a result of the city becoming, an area becoming its own city. And the revenue neutrality payments vary by how much is negotiated. So for example, the city of Citrus Heights incorporated in 1997, they just made their last payment in 2024. So when Arden Arcade was looking to incorporate, they were looking at a 25 to 30-year revenue neutrality agreement. And so that is a negotiation between the incorporation proponents and the county to come up with what that revenue neutrality dollar should be and how much is going to get paid over. So that's a big chunk and a big consideration that you need to take into account when you're looking at incorporations. Sure. Oh, sorry.
So, in 25 years for Citrus Heights to pay Sacramento County for all the services, they just paid it off, like you said. But all the revenue from their tax base went to the county, not to Citrus.
No, not all of it. It's a negotiated portion. So you negotiate what the total dollar is going to be, how much you're paying per year, for how many years.
What goes towards the principal?
Yeah, so think of it like a mortgage payment or maybe like a car payment where you negotiate what the price is going to ultimately be and then how long you're going to take to pay it. Obviously, the longer window, it's a smaller impact on your budget, but you have a longer period that you have to pay. So it's certainly a factor that proponents need to take into account when incorporating. So application, and like I said, somebody was, I'm hoping this person is here, that called our office and was eager to sign over a check and start the process. But it's not that easy to initiate. So there are 3 primary methods in which you can initiate a project. One is 25% of registered voters within the proposed city boundaries, okay? The other one is 25% of landowners within the proposed city who own at least 25% of the total assessed value of the proposed boundaries. And then the third method is a local agency adopts a resolution of application and submits it to LAFCO. And like I said, it could be any, right now you have the Rio Linda and Elverta Park and Rec District. You also have the Rio Linda Water District. Those two can petition LAFCO to say, hey, we want to turn ourselves into a city. So they could adopt a resolution to do that. Now, I will give you a cautionary, be very careful about utilizing this process. because the reality is that while an agency may be eager to do that, you really can't gauge the popular support of the idea by that. So I realized that getting the registered voters or the landowners to sign the petition is going to be a more lengthy, probably there will be some costs associated with that. The reality is that at least it gives you a gauge of the level of support. If you have signature gatherers out there and 1 in 20 people are eager to sign, but everybody else doesn't, that kind of gives you the idea of like how people think of the idea. The reality is that while LAFCO makes the decision as to whether or not you have the ability to incorporate, the final decision is up to the registered voters. It goes to an election. You get to elect whether or not you want to become a city. So that's the cautionary tale I want to give you, because there are some people who think, oh, this is a shortcut. We can just, why bother with signature gatherers? We can just, have an agency apply for that. And yeah, that's a shortcut. But the reality is that you don't really know what the ultimate level of support is. And there actually is at least one example of that. That happened in El Dorado Hills. They tried to incorporate it in 1998. They ran into financial problems. And so LAFCO actually, because they weren't paying their bills, LAFCO was actually going to shut down the incorporation process. They sued, or the proponent sued, I should say. It got settled out of court, and the settlement was that El Dorado County was going to apply on behalf of the proponents, again, so you bypass the registered voter provisions. Well, but when the county applied on behalf of El Dorado Hills, you couldn't tell what the level of support was. The LAFCO approved the incorporation and went to the ballot, and the voters turned it down. So that was the 2005 effort. There's currently one that's undergoing right now, but again, that's a cautionary tale. So the notice to circulate a petition has to be submitted 2 weeks before the start of the collection of signatures. So you have to notify LAFCO, we're going to start an initiation process, and you have to give us 2 weeks notice, and that you're going to start. So according to the government code, you basically, there are time limits as to when you can collect the signatures. So the first signature on your petition can't be older than, I think, 6 months from the last signature that you get. And then it's also subject to verification by the registrar of voters. So that, because you could have somebody from, let's say, who lives in the Natomas within the city of Sacramento sign your petition. Well, they're not eligible because they're outside the proposed boundaries. So that is subject to voter verification. You have to make sure that when you're gathering signatures, every single person has the exact same petition over and over and over again. There have been cases where there have been referendums or initiatives in which there was just a slight variation between what one signature gatherer had versus another, and it invalidated the whole effort. So you have to make sure that they all have the same petition. You have to make sure that you look at what how the petition is circulated. You are subject to disclosure requirements, and you are subject to financial disclosure requirements. Now, there's one piece that I skipped over, and I'm going to talk about right now, and that's called the preliminary CFA, or preliminary feasibility study. That is a study that you should conduct to determine whether or not you have a revenue base to support a city. There's a caution for that. The preliminary CFA will only look at the revenue side of the ledger. It will not look at the revenue at the expenditure side of the ledger. Okay, so the preliminary CFA will tell you whether or not there's there's sufficient revenue base to support a city. That's all it will do, and you will need that as part of your submission to LAFCO to incorporate. You'll want to ensure that there's a sufficient revenue base that's here. The different land uses will give you a different amount of revenue that's generated. So you want to make sure that you have within your proposed boundaries some kind of a mixture of commercial residential activity, because that will determine whether or not there's a revenue there. If you have a city that's primarily residential, it's going to fail. Why? Because residents don't generate sales taxes, which is another form of revenue that you need to become a city. You want to make sure that you have a healthy balance and mix of revenues in order to make it work. And I can tell you right now that actually residential areas, generally speaking, are typically money losers for a city or for a county. If you happen to have an auto mall, great, that's going to generate a lot of revenue for you. So you have to make sure that you have a good balance within your proposed boundaries of residential, commercial activity. So basic application requirements, you need a transmittal letter, which is what I said you have to submit within 2 weeks. You have a resolution or signed petition, a completed project information, which we have, we have those forms on our website. They're under applicant forms. Legal indemnity and disclosure forms, both financial and political. You need your preliminary feasibility analysis and a proposed service plan. We'll talk about that in a sec. And this is crucial. Your map and your legal description, your deposit and agreement to pay for all costs, and deposit for surveyor to verify your map. The map and legal description, the map piece is the one that I really want to focus on, because you need to know where you draw the boundary. We all have the idea of Rio Linda, but where does Rio Linda begin and end? Between what city and what, well, okay, the county line, you can't go north of that, but county line to what? To the Sac City limits, to Elkhorn Boulevard. You need to define what the city is, because you need to provide that map of what that proposed city is going to look like as part of your requirements. So you really need to make sure that when you, if you're ready or when you're ready to apply to LAFCO, that you have that defined. If your petition or resolution, you have to refer to Cortesino-Tuxburg. You need to list all the related changes of organization, which means we're going to retain the Rio Linda Elverta Park District, or we're going to dissolve the Rio Linda Elverta Park District and we're going to roll it into the city. So you need to have those definitions. You may propose a name or city or the city or town. So you can choose to be the city of Rio Linda, or you can choose a brand new name for yourself. You may call for the appointment of city staff. You need to append the map of the proposed city boundaries and state reasons for the proposal. Why are you incorporating? Believe it or not, that's one of the most crucial questions that you have to answer yourself. Why are we doing this? So you have to differentiate why that is. And then whether the proposal is consistent with existing spheres of influence, which I will walk you through that process. You don't need to worry about that, but that is just part of the preliminary stuff. So roles and responsibilities. I'm the executive officer for now. I am at the will of the commission. They may choose to dismiss me tomorrow. You don't know. Basically, I'll need to meet with the applicants. So who are going to be the applicants? Typically, if you're going to have a district that'll do it, those will be the applicants. Most city incorporations actually form an incorporation committee, and then they designate officers within that incorporation committee. So the incorporation committee would be the ones who would be doing the fundraising, who would be essentially leading the effort to incorporate. So I would be meeting with them to kind of determine, again, the needs and purposes for the incorporation, identify alternatives, identify risks and pitfalls, and then educate the prospective applicants of your responsibilities as the incorporation committee. Some incorporation committees actually choose to contract with a consultant who will walk them through the incorporation process, because again, this is the most expensive, most complex thing you can go through LAFCO. And so there are people actually that around the state who are consultants who specialize in this stuff. As the applicant, essentially you have to create some kind of formal organization. You are responsible for community outreach, information, and organization. You need to consider government options or governance options, articulation of the incorporation proposal details. You will be conducting the preliminary feasibility study, and you will also be building a liaison with existing agencies. If you're going to dissolve the Rio Linda Elverta Water District, you need to make sure you have conversations with that water district, so that number one, they're aware that this is a part of the proposal, and number two, they're not caught off guard. So as the applicant, LAFCO wouldn't, as the applicant, you would be responsible for these kinds of outreach. It would not be up to LAFCO. We're here to educate. We're here to analyze the proposal, but we're not there to advocate. You would also be drafting and circulating the petition. You would be raising funds. My recommendation is that you come into LAFCO with at least $150,000 in the bank. Anything less than that, you're asking for trouble. You will be participating in the negotiations with the affected agencies because, like for example, Rio Linda and Elverta Park District gets a portion of their revenues from property taxes. If a city comes into play and you're going to keep Rio Linda and Elverta as its own independent special district, you're not rolling it into the city, well, they're going to lose a portion of their property taxes, potentially. So you need to make sure that you negotiate with them and you negotiate the revenue neutrality with the county. You would also be reviewing and commenting on the documents that we generate as part of your petition. You would be participating in public hearings, and you would also be campaigning for successful outcome at the ballot box if you make it that far. Again, LAFCO cannot take a position yes or no. We can recommend, but we don't advocate. So preliminary CFA in terms of costs, these numbers, by the way, are outdated. They're from 2020. I asked the most current incorporation efforts, and I have not heard back from my colleagues yet. So, yeah, they're still probably, yeah, they're still tallying it up. So take this with a grain of salt. So preliminary feasibility studies costed about $20,000 in 2020. The comprehensive fiscal analysis, which actually is the most important piece of the incorporation process, because the CFA will not only look at the revenue side of the ledger, they will also be looking at the expenditure side of the ledger. So cities are in charge of law enforcement. So a CFA will take a look at, okay, what levels of law enforcement are you looking for? X number of officers per resident. So how much does that cost? So they would be basically, this would be the basis of your negotiations with the county, because this will entail what services are you getting from the county and how much is it going to cost for the city to take that over. And again, that's almost $100,000 as of 2020. You need to be the collection of signatures in the petition. You would also be responsible for costs for the verification of the registered voters, or the landowners if that's what you choose to do. That would be through the assessor's office. The environmental review can cost between $40,000 to $100,000, depending again where you draw the boundaries. And there's also the election costs. So that's why I mean that you need to come into LAFCO with at least $150,000. And then after that, you're going to have to be actively fundraising in order to keep those costs up. And again, as I mentioned before, the 1998 El Dorado Hills effort failed because applicants couldn't generate enough revenues to get these studies done. And the problem is, especially for the CFA, that's time sensitive. You basically take the most recent numbers from the county's budget in order to generate the expenditure side of the ledger, and those numbers become stale after about 6 months. And if preparing the CFA takes longer than 6 months, guess what? You have to start over again. Well, not only do you have to start all over again, you also have to wait until the numbers become fresh again before you can start over again. So that's what the proponents of the 1998 El Dorado Hills effort were running into. They were just not generating enough money. And as an editorial, that should have also given them a clue about the level of support for becoming a city within their community. If people are not willing to pony up money for your effort, that should be your first red flag, that the level of interest is not high. All right, there is a possibility of state loan, but I'll just laugh at that. It's in the government code. So, just so you know, essentially, again, these are stale numbers. There are currently at least 2 efforts to incorporate statewide. One is in El Dorado Hills is trying again. And then there's another effort down in Southern California. But incorporate Olympic Valley, which is in Placer LAFCO. That cost about $114,000, and they did not get to the CEQA piece. Okay, they abandoned the efforts halfway through the LAFCO process. The review of the comprehensive fiscal analysis, which by the way also has to happen, is by the State Controller's Office, is about $12,000. Again, these are 2020 dollars. And then the preparation and review of the map and legal description, but it's always what does the map look like, which is again one of the things that you need to really think about. So in terms of process, it takes about 2 years. There was an effort in Monterey County that took 7 years. Incorporated Olympic Valley and Placer was 2 years. And again, they never made it to the CEQA process. They just abandoned the process. There is an El Dorado Hills effort currently underway. I want to say that it's been I think they started the effort around 2024. So it's still ongoing. The CFA, like I said, depends on the most current end-of-year data by the county, and the law favors waiting for the end of the year if the end of the year is imminent. So let's say that we're in January. The law will basically says, no, wait until June 30th, because then you'll get the freshest numbers. So that's why I mean that they become stale after a while. And that's also why you can't use an old CFA to do a new incorporation effort, which is again what El Dorado Hills found out in 2003 when the county applied on their behalf. They thought they could still use the old CFA. No, they had to fund a new one. So these are the things that you should consider. What type of services are going to outsource and what type of services is the proposed city supposed to maintain? I've already mentioned two, water and park and rec services. But you can also outsource law enforcement, planning, building inspections, engineering, and public works. Those can be in-house or they can be outsourced. I will tell you, because there was, when I was in El Dorado, there was another attempt to incorporate before the current effort, and the proponents were saying we're going to have a 100% outsourced city, because we looked at the city in Georgia and they did it 100%. There was no city staff. There's no such thing in California. At the very least, the city council wants to make sure that they have control over their staff. So the city manager and their attorney is going to be in-house. It's not outsourced. So, if you're going in that route, or if you're thinking about that route, I'm just giving you a cautionary note that there's no such thing in California. And then again, I already mentioned it. Where is Rio Linda, right? Because Rio Linda will really determine where your registered voters are, what your total population number is going to be, what your service demand level is going to be, what the CFA is going to look at, what the CEQA looks like, and what the revenue neutrality negotiations will look like. And the CEQA piece is very important, because if, let's say, you just incorporate, like let's say, perfect example actually is Arden Arcade. When they incorporated, they were looking at totally developed land. All of it was built out. Well, that's a different level of CEQA analysis than it would be that if you had here in Rio Linda the potential of having a big swath of undeveloped land where it's currently in ag production. The level of environmental analysis is much different when your proposed city it will encompass a lot of undeveloped land versus thing that's already been built out. So again, where is Rio Linda? Does it include the community of Elverta? These are the questions that you need to think about this to that. Yes?
Traditionally, at least the last two efforts have been intended to incorporate along the Parks and Rec District lines, which means it goes all the way out to 99 north of Elkhorn Boulevard. That would include the Grand Park Trails and the Provenance developments, which would be our development and commercial tax base.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, that's a different level of analysis than if, let's say, you just start with, let's say, Rio Linda Boulevard east to, I don't know, pick a street, right?
Are you talking just Rio Linda or Rio Linda and Elverta?
Well, that's the question for you to answer.
As far as I'm concerned, me and my family, Rio Linda will have a park, leave us alone.
So, but again, there's also different, well-established communities. They have those level of we're here, they're there. But sometimes maybe you need to have their revenue base in order to make the numbers work. You know, even if it's an uneasy partnership, those are the considerations. I'm almost done, I promise. Other pitfalls, essentially the environmental review, the CFA, the lack of deposits, the election costs, the definition of what the services are going to be. And this is a huge one, VLF funds, the vehicle license fee funds. I'll have to give you a little bit of a nerdy primer in order for it to make sense. The tax that you used to pay when you purchased a new car, it used to be split between cities, counties, and the state. In 2011, the state did some shenanigans, and they essentially did what's called a triple flip. They moved revenues around that it was essentially neutral, but it took away and gave some stuff. One of the biggest effects is that the state said, we will take 100% of the VLF funds. Why should you care about that? You should care about that because what the cities used to do is what a portion of they would receive from VLF funds, which is on a per capita basis, they would all donate a portion of their VLF funds to go into this kitty. And the kitty was there to support any new incorporation effort. Because here's the thing, the moment the city becomes a city, the moment you're incorporated, you now assume all the costs from day one. One of your biggest financing mechanisms are property taxes, but you don't get property taxes right away. You almost have, depending on the time of the year, you almost have to wait 9 months before you get that revenue. So you're caught in this situation where not suddenly you have to pay for services, but you don't have the revenues to do it. That's where the VLF funds came from. And that was basically cities looking out for each other and saying, hey, you're a brand new city, here's a pot of money so you can get services up and running. When the state took away the VLF funds from the cities, that kitty went away. And it had a very real effect. The last city to incorporate was 2011. The next city to incorporate, the last city to incorporate when that fund was available was 2011. The next incorporation was 2024. There have been no cities for almost 13 years. And the only reason why Mountain House became a city in 2024, it was because it was designed to be a city from day one. It was a brand new development, brand new neighborhoods. They had all the fees and taxes essentially locked in for when people moved in. And so that way, when they eventually were ready to become a city, they had the funds to pay for the services. So that's something else that you need to think about, that essentially you will not have startup funds. It doesn't exist. They won't exist. So and again, the community desire to incorporate. What are the political considerations? Believe it or not, I'm not your enemy. I'm here to help you through the process. But I'm throwing a lot of information to you. But the reality is that we're trying to figure out what it is that you're trying to accomplish, and is there a different way to accomplish those things without becoming a city. So a lot of information. Here's my contact information. You have further questions, or if things percolate and you have you think about it overnight, my staff and I are ready to assist, and we're here to help. Please don't hesitate to reach out. This is a lot of complex information. I have some business cards. I have some brochures. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
I have a mic too.
Okay, I have a question. I just arrived.
Wait, hold on.
And you said something about talking, and I'm distracted. You said something about what do we want?
Yes.
And that's the question I have. What do the community want outside of what they have?
Yeah, one of the biggest knocks about cities is that, well, you're just adding an additional layer of government, right? You still have to vote as supervisors. You still have a city council. Oh, you will now have a city council. The counter to that is essentially that you get home rule. You get an opportunity to say what goes in what happens in your community. But the ability to define what it is that you're looking for is something that everybody in this community needs to think about. Because again, if you want, let's say, you just want better roads, that's the only reason you have for forming a new city. If you just want new roads, there are other governmental mechanisms that can get you to that point, and we can talk about those.
Keeps me
But that's for you to, not you specifically, but you as a community. That's for you to think about, why do we want to do this? Okay. Well, I made it easy. I could have spared you about half an hour.
Thank you very much for your presentation. For the most part, it was accurate and professional, and I appreciate that. And I'm grateful, very grateful, that the county supervisor is here to put this issue in front of everybody. But as you might expect, there's always two sides to every story. The LAFCO process that was described to you accurately is horrible. And it hasn't been revised in over, well, since 2000. The last time, more than a quarter century ago, was the last time the legislature made any changes to the law. And essentially what you heard tonight is that the law is full of barriers, full of reasons why you cannot have local control over your community, over your tax money. Right now, the state insists, because of what you just heard accurately, that people who are not from Rio Linda should make all the decisions about what's best for Rio Linda. I'm with California Unincorporated, a statewide group that includes Rio Linda and Elverta. I've been working with Stacy, been working with the Park District, and a number of other people in this community and elsewhere in Sacramento County. We would like to see the LAFCO process made cheaper and less burdensome, so that if people want local control over their own community, there's actually a pathway to make that happen. What you heard tonight is there isn't. Now let that sink in for just a moment. Hi, Charlie. One of the concepts you heard tonight was about CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. In 2000, the State Commission on Local Governance for the 21st Century said that provision needs to be stricken from the law, because changing the government from the county to a city is merely a change of government. It doesn't impact the environment in any way at all. Under state law, one of the things you did not hear tonight is that the county's general plan remains in effect until the new city adopts its own general plan. And all of the implementing ordinances of the county's general plan remain in effect until the new city adopts its own. So right there, you know that there is a specific process in state law that retains county control over your land use until the new city decides they want to change it. And when the new city decides to change it, if they do decide to change it, it has to be done under the clear light of the California Environmental Quality Act analysis. So that's the appropriate time to do the CEQA analysis. So my message tonight is, take what you heard with a grain of salt, understand that the current process the state has imposed is horrible and requires a long, uphill, hard slog. But also keep in mind that the county, as my supervisor, Rich Desmond, is fond of saying, is not up to the job. The county can't do all this stuff. It's not their fault. The county can't do everything it has to do because the state keeps giving the county additional responsibilities. So what we really need to do as a community, as citizens of this county, is work together and find what's best for all of us. I say a lot of unkind things, or things that my supervisor thinks are unkind about the county. It's not about him. He's a nice guy. He's a good person. Rosario is a wonderful person. And the fact that she's held this meeting shows that she's very open-minded, which is great. It's not her fault. The state says, here, you guys take our prisoners and put them in your jails. and doesn't give money to the county to pay for that. In fact, that happened before you became a supervisor, so you're completely, that's not your fault at all. We really need to know within the county budget, how much money does the county spend on municipal services, not area-wide, but municipal services like potholes and animal control? How much does the county spend in Rio Linda, in Elverta, in Antelope, in Orangevale, in Arden Arcade, in Fair Oaks, in Carmichael, everywhere in the unincorporated community? But your budget people will not tell you that because they.
I want to make sure that we do get to questions, because we do have a parks person here who has this room, and where'd he go? He's somewhere back there, and I want to make sure that I'm respectful of his time. So any questions for Jose about the process today? Yes, Charlie.
Hi, how are you? One of my bosses.
For those of you, is it on? For those of you that don't know, I'm Charlie Moore. I am the alternate for special districts on the LAFCO Commission. I am also a special advisor on the Special District Advisory Committee for LAFCO. So I'm familiar with LAFCO, and I respectfully have to disagree at sometimes with some of the things that go on at LAFCO. One of the things that I would like very much for this room to make clear to our esteemed executive director of LAFCO, I believe, and I could be wrong, but I've been involved in 3 incorporation efforts, and I believe that when I say the following, every hand in this room will go up. The main reason we wish to incorporate is we wish to keep Rio Linda, Elverta the way we want Rio Linda, Elverta to be. How many would like that? The only way you can do it is by incorporating. There is no other way to do it. And you do not have to be a city. You can be a town. You don't have to name yourself a city. In addition to that, for those of you that think it's another level of government, you're taking a level of government out. You're taking a level of government out. You will no longer go to this lady and her commission to get your permits and to do the things you need to do. It will be right here in Rio Linda, people that you know, not anybody else.
I do want to share two things. So I'm a resident of the city of Folsom, and the city of Folsom cannot meet all the needs of the current residents today. We have an $80 million backlog in Parks and Rec. We don't have enough funding to fix our roads. We're on a structural deficit. Just because you're a city doesn't mean that you're gonna meet the needs that you have. I also want to share something that Charlie said. Even if you became a city, the state mandates now tell you, you must, not can you find land? It's you must create housing. You have no choice. Jurisdictions no longer have the ability to make a decision about whether they're gonna expand or create more housing. You must meet so much housing in the regional needs housing assessment cycle. So the state does demand that jurisdictions meet their quota. So I just want to give my personal experience of those. Do we have any more questions for Jose about questions about the presentation? Because I want to make sure you guys have.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
Happy to, and again, questions that pop up that keep you up at night, please, we're here to answer questions.
So, okay. Okay.
So kind of taking off on your initial question, I'm wondering, Rosario, are you planning to host some gatherings where we can talk as a community, as Rio Lindans, about what we do want and need, and address the proposed 2 gas stations off of West 4th and Elkhorn and Marysville? And yes, that we are not, we're concerned about changing things. So will you be hosting that kind of thing?
So I'm a talker. If you want to talk about anything, I will always make time to have community meetings. We do come here every 4 months, And we used this room a couple of weeks ago. So I encourage you guys to come to those meetings. If you want to have a second meeting to talk about, one of the questions that I have right now for Jose is, well, how do you know whether you have the ability to even make it past the point of being self-sufficient financially? Do you have to pay the fees and to get a financial analysis of your area, or is there like
that's
preliminary?
What the preliminary CFA is supposed to kind of at least
Okay.
shed some light on is
Yeah.
what's your revenue base look like?
Yeah.
Because if it's a really low, again, depending on where you draw the boundaries, it'll be too expensive to do the CFA right off the bat.
Yeah.
But maybe what you can do is you can, let's say, draw the boundaries, how many residents, what the square footage is, blah, blah, blah. Find out what the revenue base is within those boundaries, and then look at cities of comparable sizes,
Yeah.
right? When you think of cities, you think of, big cities, but the reality is that we have cities that are as small as, I think Amador City is the smallest city with 200 people. Thank you, 195. So they range. They range in size. You can definitely find something of comparable size, and then if you can make some kind of back of the envelope calculations, you can look at, okay, so how many cops per resident do we want, right? And calculate that, and not just the cost of the salaries, but also what the pension cost would be.
Yeah.
You can calculate in terms of, like, again, what kind of services you want to provide. You want to keep Rio Linda, Elverta water and Rio Linda, Elverta Park and Rec District separate? Okay, well then those two things that are not on the ledger, but what other services do you want? You can contact any planning agency. Currently, for example, Elk Grove, City of Sac, there are others that they have their own planning department, but they also bring in there are planning firms that can supplement existing staff. You can call them up and say, hey, how much does it cost to, have a planning staff of 10? You can do some back of the envelope calculations, and you will still have to incur the cost of the CFA piece or the preliminary CFA piece. But on the cost side, you can do some ballpark figures.
So I want to leave with this, because I think you raised a really good question. You have a couple of gas stations coming up, and whether you support it or oppose it, here's the reality. If you don't have the tax base, you can't make it happen. And you know what the tax base means? It means you have to have that commercial corridors like gas stations, or we talk about car sales lots. Those generate a lot of revenue, but it means that you have to look at your city and say, do we have enough of that financial support to make us happen? But I'm going to leave you with this. If you want to know, I love reading and studying the city of Ileton. Go home, read on the city of Ileton and some of the challenges they've had, and it's been going on for a long time. They've come to the county, they've asked for financial support, and where are they headed? To me, it's a very interesting situation for them. And so if you want to have another meeting, we could try this in about 6 weeks. I can get some information for you guys about Rio Linda that can maybe help you make those decisions. Thank you very much. Everybody have a good night, drive safe, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
And John, thank you so much for recording.
So we're talking about people who are registered to vote are making a lot of these decisions. I'm curious to know how many.
No, you mean I said Forrest from Raleigh.
We have a lot of people moving in.
Well,
Hi there.
Don't even, I'm sure they're not. I mean, I would say a lot of people are not registered.
So you can probably
I made it about 5 minutes late.
And then when you go in the city, they're going to start in about animals and everything else. It's a bunch of crap.
Oh, thank you very much. I got you the bus now. I can't say they could have made me sleep, but I got to tell about it. I got to go bus this morning. They want to put it in my car. How you doing? Hi. I'm like, they got to pay off the I didn't go first. I think we need to I wish another drugstore would take over Friday.
We have a drugstore, bank, and they have a decent rent, place to go to. Yeah. My neighbor